I'm Becky Song. I'm the online video marketer, and this is another Video Plus Hangout. Today I'm interviewing Geoff Hoff, the creator of The Magic of Podcasts. For those of you who haven't joined us before, this is the Online Video Marketers Hangout where we discuss all things video plus online marketing strategies, techniques, tools, and integration and implementation. So before we get into it, I just want to tell you a little bit about how I met Geoff. And I'm going to go ahead and take off my screen sharing with this slide so you can see me. There we go. Coming up, I think. All right, there I am.
There you are.
So anyway, Geoff and I have actually met, well, we've been together at a number of conferences now, and that's how we met, is at a conference. And Geoff is just always one of those guys who you can ask a question, a pretty technical question, and he gives you an answer that you can actually understand, which I think is very valuable in today's world. And so, you know, recently Geoff put out his new training course called The Magic of Podcasts. And I know that there's been a lot of people who I've coached who've thought about doing podcasts, who are interested in podcasts. And really, I think one of the big hurdles is technology, and then also just kind of not understanding the whole strategy behind it. So I invited Geoff to be on my Hangout today, and he's going to answer some questions for us, a lot of questions that people have already sent me. If you're on my email list, I asked people to send me in some questions, so I have those. For those of you who might be joining me on my website, usually right underneath the video player there's a question and answer box. For whatever reason today, technology isn't with me, and my question and answer console has disappeared, so I can't actually see the questions coming in from over there. But we are over on Google+, so if you go under Hangouts, you'll find us in the events that are going on live right now. It's a public event, so you can go there and you can submit your questions there, and I'll be looking there to see if there's any questions that come up. And then for those of you who might be joining us live over on Google+, of course, you're already there, and you can submit questions there as well. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Geoff. Geoff, you want to tell us any more about you?
Yeah, I confuse a lot of people because I'm kind of split brain. I do the technical stuff, and I'm also very into creativity. I have studied the process of creativity, and so I do both sides, both the technical and the creative writing, and all sorts of creativity. I actually teach creative writing courses, and that's one of the reasons you say that I can make sense when I answer technical questions, is because I kind of speak human. I come at it from a creative mind rather than a technical mind.
It's true, and that's one of the things I love about you, and actually one of the things that I think connects you and I, because I'm also a very creative person, but I can actually be a very technical person too, and I love operating both sides of my brain, but that's not always true for everybody, and not all of us can be like that. And so it's fun having Geoff as a resource for me and for my customers and clients when they need help. I have a great go-to guy. So let's get into podcasting. Let's talk about that. First of all, you know, there's probably most of the people on this Hangout with us today know what a podcast is, but just in case we have anybody who's not quite sure what it is, could you explain it for us?
Yeah, podcasts have been around for a long time, and most of the people get podcasts over on iTunes. They are generally audio files, but you can also do video on podcasts, and you create a podcast series with episodes, and each audio file or each video file is an episode in your podcast series, and it's just a series of files where you do what you do, whether it's an entertainment podcast or a informational podcast. I have done both informational and entertainment. The one that I'm most focused on right now is kind of a humor, entertainment, opinion piece one, fairly short. And then people subscribe to them, and then they can download them into their MP3 players if they're audio, or even now they can even do it into their phones and tablets for the video podcasts. So you can actually subscribe to a podcast series, and then it automatically gets downloaded to your device so that you can watch or listen to them. And I mostly do the audio side of it, although I have some experience with the video side of it also.
And so I'd imagine people get alerts then if they've subscribed to your podcast, then they get an alert when you put up a new one?
Yes, publish mine through iTunes, and so when somebody syncs to their iTunes account, if there's a new podcast in it, it'll sync to your podcasting app over at iTunes, so that you will get alert. You can also tell iTunes that you want special alerts and that sort of thing. Yes.
Great. All right, so, one of the questions that came in, which I thought was a good question, is, you really see an uptake in people, and I'm talking more entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and small businesses, starting podcasts. And so, one of the questions that came in is it just a fad? Should I really get involved in doing it, or is it something that's going to be, here today, gone tomorrow, and it was kind of a waste of my energy? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, podcasting is not going away. The only way that it will become a fad is if you start a podcast and don't keep it up. So it's kind of up to you. And that's what a lot of entrepreneurs do, and that's one of the problems is that a lot of entrepreneurs do that, is they start a podcast and they're gung-ho and they have 2 or 3 episodes and then they just stop adding to their podcast. And once you stop adding to your podcast, iTunes will eventually just say, well, this one is dead, we're going to get rid of it, or whatever platform you want. iTunes is the most popular one. There used to be tons. There's not as many anymore. And people, if you're not updating it on a regular basis, whether that's monthly or weekly or whatever, some people even do it daily, although that just gives me a headache to think about. I do mine weekly. But whatever you're going to do, keep to your schedule, and so because you've made a promise basically to your subscribers that you're going to put a new podcast up in a regular time frame, and if you continue to do that, then you are giving them what they expect. If you don't continue to do that, they'll start distrusting you, and distrust is really bad in business.
Yeah, I'd say. So that that leads us naturally into the next question, which is why podcast?
Oh, there's so many different reasons. It's another way to be seen. It's another way to gain the authority, especially for an entrepreneur, but also for creative people, for writers and musicians. It's a way to gain the authority. It's a way to be known as an expert in your field. When you have, there's lots of different ways that you can do that. You can have books, and you can have your blog, and you can have products, and you can have reports that you give away. But when you have a podcast, it actually gives you really solid evidence that you know what you're talking about. And podcasts are indexed in Google so that when people are searching for the information that you have, if you have given good keywords in your podcast title, in your podcast content, and your descriptions to your podcast episodes and the titles to the episodes, people will find your podcast, and if they like what they say, they'll subscribe. And so it really is a way to build your audience. So there's the question of authority, there's a question of building your audience, and also podcast is a way to, if you do an interview podcast, which is one of the many different ways that you can do a podcast, and that's what a lot of entrepreneurs do, you can meet other entrepreneurs in your field. Entrepreneurs in your field that wouldn't necessarily give you the time of day would love to be interviewed in either an audio or a video podcast. Audio is easier to set up, but like what Becky's doing here, she gets experts to interview, and therefore she has connections with people that she wouldn't normally get connections to, and that's wonderful. There are people who have Connie Reagan Green has 2 podcasts, and she does interviews on them. She's been keeping them up for 2 or 3 years now, and because of her podcast, has connected with some amazing entrepreneurs that she wouldn't otherwise have made a connection to, and now they're doing products together and they're doing business together, and so there's a whole big wide open possibility. That's a real long-winded answer to the question.
But I like one of the things that you said, which is basically it's another platform to be seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when you consider how many people are, and I'm just talking about iTunes because it's the most well-known, but when you consider how many people are accessing iTunes every month or even every day, there's a tremendous amount of, ability that gives you to be over there and be found, and you can't be found over there unless you have a podcast or you're a musician and you got music, right? Right.
And I even say that musicians should get podcasts because you can do all sorts of things in your podcast as a musician. You can interview other musicians. You can talk about the process. You can sort of introduce things that you're working on but haven't become live yet. And so there's a lot you can do. You can have little mini concerts on your podcast if you're a musician. You know, so it's a really wonderful platform for, you know,
yeah,
for musicians also. Yeah.
That's a good point, is that creative people, whether you're musicians or writers or artists or performers, are really business owners too.
Right.
And so that gives you another platform that you can put yourself out there and help yourself be found. So, you know, whether you're in the traditional form of business and business marketing, or whether you're more of a creative person, it's still a great platform for people to see you, hear you, and create some authority and visibility.
Perfect. Yep.
Great. I wanted to share a statistic too that I found that I thought was really interesting. Let me throw my slide back up there. So I was looking at this yesterday, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. All right. So this is put out by Share of Ear, and it shows you the share of time spent listening to different audio sources. And if you see over here on the left, this kind of light blue box, it's podcast. 25.9% of the time spent listening to audio is podcasts over there. So I thought that was a pretty compelling reason too.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I was surprised. Yeah, it actually even came in higher than the owned music. So, you know, people are listening to podcasts over CDs, their own digital music downloads and things like that. So I thought that was pretty. Yeah.
Part of that statistic is podcasts of things like radio shows. I mean, I subscribe to This American Life podcast, and I subscribe to Radiolab podcast, and I download them to my phone and then listen to them in my car when I take trips. And so a lot of that is that, but I also subscribe to a lot of entrepreneurs' podcasts, and I listen to their interviews when I'm taking trips or I'm in the car. And in LA, you're in the car a lot.
Yeah, well, you know, Geoff and I have met twice this year in Las Vegas at different conferences, and guess what I was listening to on the way there and on the way back as I was driving?
Yes, I met podcasts.
Yeah, so, and actually I have another slide on that, because I was wondering, like, well, what has brought on this whole, you know, podcasting trend? Because it is something that we're seeing increase more and more. And I thought this was interesting. Found this on the New York Times website. The secret to radio success is actually cars. Because 44% of all radio listening takes place in the car, and now people are loving more on-demand radio. Because, you know, you listen to your radio stations in the car and you start listening to stuff you don't want, and you're changing channels all the time, but you put on a podcast, something that you've subscribed to, something that you want, and, you know, it just makes your drive time go faster. You get to learn stuff. It's great.
Yeah, I have a friend who calls that the University of the Automobile.
Yeah, exactly. I do that all the time. Even in just, you know, at the end of my day, I have to go grab my kids from their various schools, and, you know, I'm gone about an hour and a half, and that whole time I'm listening to podcasts and things, you know, to keep up and keep fresh in my industry.
Right.
But yeah, in this slide it says that GMSA, which is an industry analyzer, estimates that 50% of all cars sold in 2015 will be internet connected, and 100% by 10 years from now.
Sure.
You know, so that shows you that podcasting, I think, is here to stay. Really.
Yeah. Yeah. As I say, it's been around a long time, and any time that there's a new advance in the technology to listen, it only enhances the power of podcasts. You know, it used to be that the only way that you could listen to podcasts was through an MP3 player, you know, through an RSS feed somehow, or an MP3 player. And now, you know, you can listen to them everywhere.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I mean, even with the applications available on your computer, if you're sitting in your office, you can listen to it too without having to get on your smartphone and use your data usage and all that kind of stuff. So that's nice. So another question that came in, Geoff, is how can podcasting be used to grow your list?
Oh, well, one of the things that I highly recommend is if you have a list and if you have a place for people to sign up, which if you're an entrepreneur, you should have both of those things. A lot of people have lists but don't have places for people to sign up, which is kind of puzzling to me. But either start with or end with or both on your podcast saying, sign up for my free information on, petting cats or whatever your podcast is about over at www.petmycat.com. Start your podcast with that. Say, this is Geoff Hoff from petyourcat.com. Remember to get your freebie over here. Then you do your podcast and then do an outro with the exact same thing. And that's one way to do it. A lot of times with podcasts, especially if you're doing an interview, get an affiliate link from the person that you're interviewing, and then at the end of the don't have the entire podcast be a sales pitch, because people will be start just trusting you right away. Then they don't want to listen to a sales pitch in their car for a long time. But at the end of it, if they've really liked what they've heard, say, and you can get Joe Smith's program on whatever, over here, and then give your affiliate link to that particular program, so people go purchase it, and you can make money that way. Mm-hmm. And there's also, you can have a paid podcast feed. Oh, I'm getting weird feedback. Oh well, you can have a paid podcast feed, which I don't recommend. In other words, people pay like 99 cents to get your podcast. I don't recommend that. I recommend that you do the podcast for free and then have other avenues for it to bring in money.
So that leads to another question, which is, how can you make podcasting profitable? I mean, you mentioned, putting a link in there for if you're selling somebody's affiliate product, or if you're interviewing, I should say, somebody and they have a product that you can affiliate, then you have that. But how can you, as a business owner, having a weekly podcast, make money with it?
Well, a lot of how you make money on a podcast is is peripheral. It's not direct from the podcast. I mean, as I say, you can charge for your podcast. I don't recommend that because you won't get as many subscribers. Mm-hmm. Unless you already are Stephen King, he could have very easily charge for his podcast. But the more you are known, the bigger you grow your list, the more authority you have in people's minds, the more your business is going to grow. And the more your business is going to grow, the more money you're going to make. And so podcast is part of the overall strategy for growing your business online. In itself, I don't necessarily say that it's going to make you a millionaire. It's not. But it is part of a very powerful strategy. It's one tactic in a very powerful strategy of being online to have a business. And that includes, as you say, creative people, because if you're selling a book online, you have a business online. If you're selling an album online, you have a business online. So getting the podcast to bring people to your backyard so that you can then capture their name and email address, and then you can promote to them.
Yeah.
So. Now,
I've listened to a couple of podcasts that are big, and they seem to have sponsors, because you hear a little advertisement come in. So is sponsorship a big thing happening over on in podcasting, or is that kind of more for the biggies, the big time radio type shows and things like that?
Right now, my thought is that you probably are not going to get sponsors until you can prove to the sponsors that you have a certain amount of listenership. Mm-hmm. That could change. I have not seen Apple moving toward the Google model of, ads on it that you can share, which is a really good model. It would be wonderful if they did do that you could share some of the revenue, because they do advertising some on the podcast feeds, not much. But my thought is that until you grow your listenership to be something substantial, you're probably not going to find sponsors.
Okay, and I would imagine that people who have sponsors now, that they're actually putting it on their show, on their recording. It's not something that iTunes is putting on. They're not. No. Functionality right now. It's actually the podcaster accepting a deal with a sponsor and then putting the ad within their actual broadcast recording.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's an agreement you do with your sponsor, and then whatever the video or text or audio or whatever that you want to cut into your thing is between you and the sponsor. Yes.
So, but for the entrepreneur, the strategy then would be to have the broadcast to increase your visibility, and then to be sure to move people basically from your podcast onto your website, where you have better opportunities to, have them join your list and find your products and your services and things like that, and then engage with you more personally, business-wise there.
Yeah, that absolutely is what I recommend. Is that you bring people back to your own backyard, and then you can capture them there and then promote to them there.
Okay, great. Well, this is one that I actually am really interested in, because I do this VIDEO+ Hangout on Google, and so when I saw this question come in, I was like, yes, that's a question that I have too, which is, if you have a YouTube series or a Hangout series like I have here, how hard would it be to convert that into a podcast series?
It's not easy. Google does not have a mechanism by which you can get to the raw video file, and that's what you need in order to have a podcast. Now, the other side of that is that anybody can subscribe to a YouTube channel through iTunes. And so your subscribers can subscribe to your YouTube channel in iTunes. But for you to publish your YouTube channel on iTunes, the only way that you could really do that is to then host those same videos elsewhere, so that you have access to the raw file that you can feed in through iTunes. Does that make sense?
So you're saying that the MP4 that YouTube provides you, if you say download MP4, it's not the raw file, so it's not a good enough quality to put up then over on your podcasting place.
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you are trying to make your YouTube channel into a podcast, you can't do it from YouTube, because YouTube doesn't give you access to the raw file. If you want to download that file from YouTube and then put it over onto another hosting service like Amazon S3 or Podbean or I don't know. There's a bunch of hosting, file hosting sites.
Right.
Then you can use that file to create a podcast. The way that we teach how to create a podcast, and then publish it into iTunes. You can't publish the channel itself, but you can use those files elsewhere to publish.
Right. So you just can't do it directly. You can't take your YouTube channel or a playlist and directly put it in somehow into iTunes, but you can download your files, post them somewhere else, and then link that with your iTunes podcast channel. Is that what they call podcasts? Podcast.
It's just your podcast, your iTunes. Yeah, your iTunes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So so you could repurpose, though. If you're doing a series of videos, you could repurpose them and have them as podcasts over on iTunes with a few steps.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I say, if you want, you can tell people how to subscribe to a YouTube channel through their own iTunes account. They can actually search for a channel and subscribe to it through iTunes, but you don't have control of that. They do.
Okay, great. Let's see. Let me get to some of these other questions here. Here's another question. What platforms can you put your podcasts on besides the obvious, which is iTunes? Are there other podcasting places you could?
As I said, there used to be a ton of them. There's not so many anymore. For audio podcasts, I'm getting feedback. I don't know if you're getting it also, so I'll try to talk slowly. For audio, you can publish them on SoundCloud. I don't think that SoundCloud does video. Also, you can do TuneIn. There's one that's a paid service called Libsyn, Libsyn. Podbean is a service that you can pay. Podomatic. There are several different ones. There are also lots of different places that you can host your. You can't really host. You're not hosting your files over on iTunes. You're linking your files onto iTunes through what they call an RSS feed, which is way technical. I don't want to get into the mechanics of that. So you have to find a place to host your files, and then feed them into iTunes. Something just happened over there.
You still with me?
Are you? I am.
Can you
just
hear me?
something just
So I
changed.
just noticed that my lower third popped up, and I don't know why, because I'm just sitting here listening to you. But anyway.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay? You still getting feedback?
Yes, I can. There's just something that popped up, and then everything went fluey for a second.
It's really weird.
But the main place to be, I mean, the main place that people are going to be finding you is going to be on iTunes. So that would be the place that I would go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to make it more simple.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And let's see. And you kind of answered this already, but let's just pull it out and answer it again. Can you charge for podcast subscribers? Can you charge for your podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. When you set up your podcast, you can tell iTunes, yes, I want to charge this. You can tell them how much to charge. And there are reasons to do that. And, like if you're actually going to podcast a course, absolutely charge for it. And then it's kind of a limited beginning. It has a beginning and it has an end rather than an ongoing podcast series. And yes, charge for that. But for a regular ongoing podcast, I wouldn't, but you absolutely can.
Okay.
And it's really just easy. It's just clicking a button and telling them how much they want to charge.
Okay, great. There was one other question that I thought about. I'm going to jump over really quick and see if we've got any questions and answers over on Google, or questions I should say. Okay, I don't see anything there. Okay, so let me get back to you. Okay, so another question that just came in is, wait, let me just read this for a second. So you were mentioning, charging for kind of a short run, maybe type of a training course or something would be a good idea. So, and that led to this question, which is, how many should you do? If you're not going to do that kind of thing, where it's a short run training, and so you're going to do 10, you're going to hit the intro through the advanced training stuff, and then it's done. But what if if you're doing podcasting regularly to build that credibility and that visibility and whatnot, how often do you think it should be done?
Well, as I say, it has to be fairly regular, and you have to decide whether it's going to be monthly or twice a month or weekly or whatever you want to do, and then keep up to that schedule. And I would give yourself I will continue this in this schedule for 6 months or a year, and just keep doing it. If you find that it's valuable, and if you find that your traffic has grown because of it, and if you find that you're getting the benefits that are available to it, keep it up. If you find that none of that is working for you, it's kind of not worth it for you. But I would suggest that if you do keep it up, it will work for you. So I don't know that there's necessarily a limiter on that.
Okay. So do you think it's just where you need to be able to establish with an audience that it's going to come out at certain intervals? So if you said twice a month, that would be okay, as long as you establish that with your audience, and then you're true to your release dates, so to speak.
Absolutely. And consistency.
One thing that you commented on briefly was, to try it out for a period of time. What do you think a good trial period would be?
I would say minimum 6 months. Because you're not going to build your audience in a month or two. And usually when people start podcasts and then get bored with it, or it gets way down on their list of things to do, they'll be really gung-ho for the first month, maybe a couple for the second month, and then they'll sort of peter out. That isn't enough time to build an audience. And if you come back to it 6 months later, any audience that you've built, you're going to have to start from scratch.
Yeah.
So I would say, give yourself a good 6 months to build a good, strong audience. And then if you haven't by then, start looking at what you haven't done. I mean, you have to, just putting up the podcast isn't enough. You have to actually promote it. You have to let people know it's there on all your other social media. This is just one piece of your social media. So you have to let them know it's there. If you have a list, you have to let your list know that it's there and remind them occasionally. I've just put up a new podcast. Remind them, have you listened to my podcast? Do it on Facebook and on LinkedIn and on Twitter and all of the other places. Put out press releases. Get people to the podcast. So you do some promotion so that it starts snowballing.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so let's talk a little bit about the technology, because I know that's big on people's mind too. How hard is it to learn how to do a podcast and get it up and all that kind of stuff?
The initial setup can be daunting. It's not difficult. It's just sort of like you look at all the pieces and you go, ah! But there are some tools that make it infinitely easy. I highly recommend that you use your WordPress blog as the place to feed your podcast. There's a plugin that I recommend you use called PowerPress that setting up that will help you. It will take care of a lot of the steps that you used to have to do manually. Way back when, it was very difficult because you had to actually build your RSS feed by hand. Now there are tools that do it for you. You don't even have to know what any of that stuff is. It's just done for you. And then one time you set up your WordPress site, one time you set up the plugin, one time you set up the feed into iTunes, and once that's all done, then from there on out, it's just a matter of either recording your audio or recording your video regularly, hosting it, and then what you do is you make a new post that connects to that plugin, and the plugin takes that post and turns it into an episode on your feed. So it really has become. So
it's a one-time setup that after that is extremely easy to just record, pop it into that site and plugin that you've got, and it automatically sends it through the RSS feed over to iTunes and lets them know you've got a new podcast there.
Yep.
Right. Well, that doesn't sound too bad. I had one other question that do you recommend having a whole new site for that, or can you do it through your main website?
I truly highly recommend you do it from your main website, because you've already begun to brand that. Mm-hmm. People already know that that's who you are. Mm-hmm. And so for it to come from your main website makes sense in terms of your entire internet package, how you're presenting yourself. So that's what I recommend, is to do it from your main website.
Great. All right, so for people who want to know step by step how to do it, you have a new training course called The Magic of Podcasts. So will you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's there's two different levels. There's one where I just basically show you through videos and PDF the steps that you have to take to set up the plugin, to record your podcast, to host your podcast, and then to set up the feed over on iTunes. So you go through all the steps for that. There's also a done-for-you level where you learn how to do it, and you hire me to actually do the technical stuff for you. So all you then have to do is record your podcast at that point. So both of those are available on that particular site.
Okay.
And to get to it, you can go to beckysanga.com/podcastmagic.
Yeah, and I put it up there on the screen so you can see it, but beckysanga.com/podcastmagic. So and that's Geoff's new program, and I can't actually wait to dig into it. I haven't yet, but I think I'm going to actually hire you to do it for me. So I'm excited about that, because I think it's time for me to jump on board. So, well,
cool.
Geoff, I really appreciate you being on my Hangout today and for answering all these great questions about podcasting. Is there anything else that you want to tell us about podcasting that we didn't cover here that you think people should know?
No, I really enjoy having a podcast up, and I've had a couple in the past. I'm now doing, as I say, my humor one, and I'm just digging it. It's just a lot of fun. So I recommend it for everybody.
And how can people find you over there?
It is called thatwouldbeme.net.
Right.
That's what actually the podcast is called. That Would Be Me. So but it's from my humor website, which is thatwouldbeme.net.
All right. Great. All right. So for anybody who wants to dig into Geoff's podcast, you can go find him over on iTunes. And for anybody who wants to, delve into the world of having their own podcast, then check out Geoff's program, The Magic of Podcast, and the link is right there on the screen. And I thank you all for joining us today. Thank you again, Geoff. And we'll see you on the next VIDEO+ Hangout. I'm Becky Song of the Online Video Marketer. Thanks a lot.